Hello and welcome to Tremaine Sci-Fi. Today we are interviewing James Noll, author of the new book Mungwort. So James, just to kick us off, give us a little introduction about yourself.
I am an author, I'm a musician, and I'm a teacher. I grew up in Virginia. This is where I live, and this is where I like to set a lot of my fiction.
Right. Okay, and so James was very kind enough to give us a copy of his of Mungwort. So Jag has read it, and
Yep.
so Jag will now begin the interrogation of James.
So, as you probably got from the title of the podcast, we are mainly science fiction. We are looking at expanding into fiction in general. Um, that said, Day of the Triffids largely accepted as being sci-fi, so Mungwort can certainly count if you want it to. But how do you categorize the book? Sort of horror, thriller, suspense, or
Yeah, well, horror and sci-fi overlap. There are a ton of novels and movies where you see that overlapping, and one of the most famous ones is Alien.
Hmm.
Alien is horror sci-fi. The tropes, the characters, the beats in the movies and the beats in the novels are very, very similar. When Mungwort itself actually started off as a script titled "I Ain't Gonna Work on Lilith's Farm No More," which came out of
I wouldn't
a
either.
short film. What's that?
He
I wouldn't
wouldn't
work
either.
there either.
Yeah, no, nobody wants to. Horrible things happen. That came out of a short film that I developed out of a short story. The short story itself, which was titled "Prey," not like praying, but Prey.
Yeah.
That was meant to be solely horror, and then when I adapted it into a script, that was more. I would say that was more thriller and quiet horror. And then when me and my writing partner sat down to write the feature length movie, which was "I Ain't Gonna Work on Lilith's Farm No More," we started edging more towards there were horror elements, and there was the science fiction that was mixed into it, and then I adapted the novel out of that, and so that it's a weird like non-linear way of writing something. That's usually not how novels are created, but that's how this one was created, and that's how I think of it. There's these elements of horror, there's body horror in it, but there is a heavy amount of this. I like to think of it as like weird science fiction. It's definitely not actual science that's involved here. If there is any, it's more like HP Lovecraftian type science, where there's elements of science that are in there, and you take it and twist it and make it your own. And that's how I think of it. It's this amalgamation of science fiction, horror, and then because people have to enjoy the characters and worry about the characters and like the characters. There, then I saw that Necromonicon. There it is. um, there's a little bit of drama, and my writing partner Chip, he helped me write the script. One of the things that he liked to pump up was some of the elements that makes you care for the characters more, and so we added themes about immigration, and the lack of caring about workers that seems to be kind of endemic right now, and so you kind of like put that into this casserole, and then see what happens as a result. And then of course you plug in the beats, the novel beats, the movie beats, and everything like that. So I'm not sure if that was succinct enough, but that's kind of how I thought of it. Is this like this mash of all these things that creates a good story.
Yeah, that's fine. I definitely see it as somewhat of an amalgamation of genre and style. You did mention the beats. I'm not sure how up you are on the different forms of narrative. It seemed to follow and I'll be pronouncing this horribly wrong because it's a foreign name, the Fichtean curve or Fichtian curve, where it just has a well, in proper Fichtean curve, it's a rising like escalation of conflict and just continually rising with very little resolution until quite close to the end. And I think this was something you, Tremaine, had a little bit of difficulty when it came to reading with, was it come in quite hard with conflict and the interpersonal aggression, and then just really held that tension quite well for quite a while. Was that an intentional subversion of the classic 3-act structure, or was it something you just it just happened because of that's the fit the story you wanted to tell? Or?
Well, I think what happened, so because of the way that we wrote this, my writing partner Chip, he was majorly responsible for shaping the script narrative, and he was working in that 3-act structure. And then for a variety of reasons, we wrote this in the middle of the pandemic, and the short film was shot in the middle of the pandemic, and it allowed some time to pass before I got around to, I think it was March of 2020 is when I said, look, there's going to be some time between the release of the short film and what we can do with the script, but I don't want to drop the project. And the goal was always to have complete control of all of the assets that are involved with this type of creativity. And so I always knew I was going to adapt it to a novel, and then I was going to adapt the novel into an audiobook, and then I was going to have, some sort of music aspect to it, whatever was going on with the short film or the larger feature film. And so I think what ended up happening was it was born out of this 3-act structure, and then I had to adapt it into a novel. And the first thing that I did was I sat down and had my dual screen up, and I was looking at the script, and then I had what I was actually writing on my Pages document and adapting what was going on with the description lines and the dialogue lines, and I did it almost like, I wouldn't say word for word, but it stuck pretty close to what the script was doing. And it took me about 2 weeks to do that, which is unprecedented. Writing a full story for me in that I was meaning to turn into a novel in 2 weeks is, I've never done something like that before. I can write 1,000 words a day. An average novel is about 88 to 90,000 words. And, so it takes that amount of time if you do the math. And I even contacted Chip. I was like, oh my God, I nailed it down, but it's only 33,000 words. And I had to add 40,000 words to it. And I think that's where what you were talking about was the extension and the lengthening of the suspense and investigating the world and getting more and more into the characters and creating more of like some of the monsters that weren't in the script ended up popping up in the novel itself. I allowed myself to be freer with some of the ideas that in a script I was trying to hold back because you're worried about, how much money is it going to cost to produce something like this? And are we turning this from a $5 million script into a $3 million script, or a $3 million script into an $8 million script? You really have to think about all those things. With a novel, it was a much freer. And so I was allowed to suspend some of those particular beasts like you were talking about. And maybe that is what maybe the result of that was what you're talking about. It just kept on creating that elevation of suspense and letting the reader off the hook, and then creating it a little bit longer than what the movie would have been allowed to do, because in terms of words, the movie was 30,000 words, but in terms of the novel, it ended up being 77 to 80,000, somewhere around there. So it was never like an actual plan. It just ended up happening because, well, for two reasons. You want your novel to be a richer experience, and it takes more time to describe things and to set up characters and investigate scenes and provide some expository information. And you want to expand that world a little bit more, which is why a lot of people say when they go from books to movies, they go, well, the movie wasn't as good. Well, that's because they didn't have enough time. The movie only has 90 minutes. You
Mm.
had however long it took you to get through the story with the novel. So I think that's kind of what went on between those two different adaptations.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Like, I spent 2 days, maybe 2.5 days in total reading the book. I wouldn't spend that on a movie.
Hopefully not.
Peter Jackson movie, maybe. or
Even that's still broken into different movies, isn't it?
or even with what's his name, Scorsese after Irishman.
Oh,
Oh, that took me forever.
That yeah, it's oof. It's good.
30 minutes at a time. It was like the new Batman movie, The Batman. I was like, all right, this is 3 hours long. I'm devoting 40 minutes each session.
I think every movie should be 98 minutes. 93 to 98. It's like perfect.
Yeah.
That's good.
It's a good session. You're diverted and then you can move on with your life.
You got enough time for it. You don't need a bathroom break. It's good. I don't know how typical Mungwort is compared to your other books or other works in general. So the characters are in near constant conflict with each other. I don't think there's two characters that like each other until possibly when Amana shows up.
Right.
Even the somewhat romantic interests of each, the couples still don't seem that keen on each other all the time.
Right.
Does writing something with so much just interpersonal aggression, does that affect you while you're writing it? Like, does that mess you up a little? I don't know how to put it.
No, I enjoy that. It's fun. One of the things, I know that sounds weird, but it's fiction, and so one of the things I've taught creative writing. Well, I changed counties this year, but for about 17 years, I taught creative writing at the high school level. And one of the things that I advocate for my students is to always make things more difficult for your characters. Not that you don't want mustache twirling villains and crazy hyperbolic conflict, but if there is a logical, reasonable way for two people not to get along, that's more interesting than everything going okay and nothing ever happening for your characters. And in that way, it's fun to write. And it's not that you have to keep them in constant conflict, but if you're talking, I think the two romantic characters you're talking about are Jake and Aiko.
Yep.
Okay. Who actually, because of constraints in budgeting when we're writing the script, we cut those characters out, which is kind of the fun of making the novel different from the movie. But in the novel, they're summer. It's a summer romance. Both of them know that it's not going to go beyond this, and so it's a sexual relationship. There is an enjoyment of the characters. They like being around each other, but they also both know that this isn't going to go beyond the 2 months that they're staying together. And because of that, there's going to lead to some almost, I would say, instant irritation. Maybe the irritations that would be prolonged or put off in a longer relationship, where two people are thinking this is going to be something they're going to pursue for a longer period of time. They instantly know, hey, this isn't really going to be that long. So Aiko, who's smarter than Jake, is going to call him on it. And Jake, who's irritated with her because he feels she thinks she's smarter than him, is just going to be upset with that type of thing. But in terms of the way it affects me, it's well, if anything, it's enjoyable. I have something to write about now. It's so much more fun than to just say like, hi, how are you? Everything's great. Nothing's wrong. Everything's going well. That's just that's not fun for me. That's not fun for the reader, and that's definitely not fun for the viewer. So you create these nodes of disinterest or irritation or whatever to move the story forward.
So just a question about that. Do you enjoy the sort of conflict between them as the sort of being able to watch it. You know how some people get like, you know, when you're sitting at like a cafe, you can hear a couple arguing behind you, and you get like that sort of like, oh, what's happening here? And then you
Yeah.
and your girlfriend are like sitting there and you're listening to it, and then she's like, your girlfriend's like, ah, I'm on her side. And you're like, what? How can you be on her side? And then you start an argument. But yeah, anyway, so do you enjoy that sort of like that aspect of it, just having like a conflict to look at?
I mean, it depends on the situation. I know if both me and my wife were in that particular situation, listening to that couple, both of us would be immediately uncomfortable. And we're like, oh my God, let's get the hell out of here. But I have in the past, as an exercise, when I was in college, I used to sit around and just eavesdrop on conversations. And there were, this sounds very, very awful, but there were a few times where I'd sit around and I would transcribe the conversation to get the feel and the rhythm of the actual words they were using. I didn't really care about the conversation. I wasn't trying to get some sort of weird thrill out of it. I just wanted to understand how the back and forth was going.
Right.
But there was never any like, oh. But you can't avoid that. Sometimes, you know, something happens out in public and, you know, I'll look at my wife and go like, oh, did you hear that? Like, oh my God. That's unavoidable. Most of the time though, it's a matter of like, no, I'm just here for my coffee. I don't want to deal with whatever's going on over there. But in terms of writing, it is what I actively seek out. It's more interesting if there is actual conflict.
I don't think it's that weird. I might be misremembering the author, but I think it was Stephen King would do the same thing where he'd sit somewhere and be like, how do people talk to each other? How are these people communicating? And he'd do notes.
Yeah, what's his name?
You gotta know.
Neil Gaiman on Masterclass, which I watched legitimately and legally. He talks about in one of his classes just going out and doing exactly what you said. Just sitting down and going, yep, she said that, he said this. Oh. And just sort of that psychopathic way of just going, all right, I'm going to take this home and see how I can change it.
You're studying it. Yeah.
Whether you
I think one of the earliest, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, carry on.
One of the earliest criticisms I ever got from like a piece of fiction, this is like high school. I think it was from my 11th grade teacher when the assignment was to write a story. And one of the things he said was like, this dialogue doesn't sound realistic. This is not the way that people actually talk. And somewhere in there, I took that to heart to do exactly what you were talking about. And I probably read or probably got the idea, since you brought up Stephen King, he wrote that book on writing. Yes. And I probably got that from him. He's like, go out and listen to the way that people talk and try to write it down to see how the give and take actually occurs. And it's definitely beneficial. I mean, you know, people don't talk in paragraphs. People don't talk in platitudes. They interrupt each other all the time. They say they do all these things. They stutter. They have specific tics. They have all these things that you can add to whatever it is that you're writing.
And that sort of like the hand gestures, I think we forget to do that a lot as writers. We forget to go, or...
That's true. That's true. Sometimes it might be too much or it might be too little.
Yeah.
But what you can do is you can use those things to your advantage to create the character itself.
Yeah, like punctuate or like it.
Yeah. But what you want to do is you want to create a memorable character. One of my favorite characters that has like the most memorable dialogue is Ignatius J. Reilly from A Confederacy of Dunces. I don't know if you've read that, but if you have, or when you do, he has the most memorable cadence, tone, and diction that exists, and you can't help but once you read it and then you catch an excerpt out of it, you go like, that's Ignatius J. Reilly. That's how he talks. And that's what you want to do as an author. You want all of your readers to know, without even being told somebody is speaking, that's that particular character. And then when somebody responds, oh, that's the other character. And in that way, that's why studying the way people speak is important, you know. And In very basic terms, it's not stalking, it's research. I'm just listening.
That'll be my defense in court. Yeah. Yeah. Jag, Jag, you wanted to bring
heaps
up.
more.
Did you want to bring up the amount of cats that were dedicated to?
Yes, this was dedicated to a good number of cats, wasn't it?
Yes. I realized in writing that dedication how many cats my family has. So yeah, I tried to go from oldest to newest. So the oldest cat we have is Iggy. He's still alive, by the way. I wrote that dedication last year around this time. He's about 19.
Ooh.
Cats, they can. Yeah, I know. Exactly.
It's a good run.
He is amazingly annoying at this point. He wants to sleep and eat, and then he yowls at us anytime that he's hungry. I'm a teacher, so I wake up around 5:15 in the morning, and he will yowl outside the shower door for me to come and feed him, which is like the equivalent of like a quarter cup of food. But he lets us know when he's hungry, and he refuses to groom, and he doesn't like it when I brush him. So there's hair all over the place, and then when I do brush him, he attacks the cat that we just got, whose name is Grace Kelly, and she's brand new, and she loves him, and he hates her. And so she'll go around and she'll try to boop his nose and like play with him, and he's just walking around constantly going like, oh my God, get off me. So those are our two cats. But then my oldest daughter, who is 27, has two cats that she named after the main characters from Pride and Prejudice, Bingley and Darcy. And then my younger two daughters, Taylor and Elena, each got their own cats. And that's when I started writing that dedication. I was like, holy crap, we are a cat family. And we've owned dogs, but we have an enormous amount of cats in this family.
So I suppose most of my remaining questions sort of veer towards spoiler territory. So we might just leave those for if there's excess, time, because we do try to make this an hour. But it would be a good.
We never do, but yeah.
It would be a good segue for you though, Tremaine. For like, what do you like, the writing process?
So, there's something we like to ask now because some people get really weird and some people are super normal. Do you have any rituals when you write? Do you is there a certain cup of tea or cup of coffee you need to drink? Is there a song you needed to listen to? Is there a time you need to write? Are you super ritualistic, or are you more like, as long as the door's shut or as long as I can focus, I'm fine?
I think early on, it was more of the former. When I was younger and starting to try to do this, my mother always had a sense from when I was like on my own and being independent and happy. And then she would come seek me out and try to make me do something. And so it turned into like, it was also a maturity and not really knowing my own process at that point. And I had to like feel when I was ready to write. And then I could do it, and it could strike at any moment. And there was a lot of pathos involved. There was tons of emotion, and it had to hit me when it hit me. When I started having children, and there was only a limited amount of time for me to do this, I started learning how to turn it on when I needed to turn it on. And there was never any specific ritual at that point. It was just, dude, you've got an hour, your kid's playing soccer, knock out 500 words, sit on the hill and pretend to watch her play and get this done. And in a way that kind of benefited me, because now I can go, okay, I've got these 2 hours in the morning or in the afternoon or wherever it is that I write. If it's summer, it's the morning. If it's during the school year, it's the evening. And the goal when writing for me is always to knock out something new, 1,000 words at a time. You can plan out how long a draft is going to take you. So if a novel takes 90,000 words, I know I have 90 days to write this thing. Because I'll be writing 1,000 words a day. Sometimes it's 500, sometimes it's 1,500, however it works out. but I can go on the front porch and go, no, I've got this time dedicated, sit down, go over what you just wrote. That takes about 15 minutes, and then move forward with the plan, whatever plan I've knocked out for myself, and get as far forward in that particular part of the draft that it needs to go. I do like to listen to music. I do like it to be quiet. Obviously, like, I turn the phone upside down or put it away. I try to be isolated because obviously if I've got people coming up and constantly interrupting me, it's really hard to think of sentences. Creativity is much more difficult than people give it credit for. You really, really have to dedicate a lot of time and thinking to it. And I can sit there for, it seems like, 5 or 10 minutes trying to come up with a passage or an idea or something, and then boom, it hits, and then you're off and running for like another 5 or 10 minutes. In drafting, I try not to go back over what I've written because you just want to get the draft done. But sometimes you do think about sentence length. Sometimes you do think about the way that you've said something or the words that you're using. You do have to go back and change them. And it's that deep in terms of drilling down into what it is that you're doing. And so if there is a ritual, it's just the need to be able to have that time alone wherever I am to be able to get that done. But I don't have a specific spot. And maybe I'm lucky in that way. I know there's a lot of people say like I can only do it here, here, and here. But I've written novels in Starbucks. I've written novels like sitting out on my back deck. One of my favorite places to write now, we just moved a couple of years ago. We have a covered front porch, so I go out there if the weather's nice. But it does feel like, to me, if I know it's time to get that work done, I can go wherever it is I need to go to get that work done, and I can sit down and do it. One of my what you just said just reminded me of something. I used to bartend at a bar down here called Orbits. I'm in Fredericksburg, by the way. Where are you guys? Just a digression, but I know we're in opposite time zones.
So we're both in New Zealand. Jag's in the capital of Wellington, and I'm in a small town of Mungwort. Okay.
If you ever come to Virginia, if you ever visit me in Virginia, I got to take you to some of the bars that I used to write in. Before I became a teacher, I was a waiter, I was a kitchen staff worker, and I was a bartender. And in all three of these different places, what's that?
You poor thing.
Oh, I know.
I was a chef. I was a chef for a year and a half. So.
The amount of drunks who have thrown dollar bills at me, and the amount of bad white boy reggae music that I've listened to in my life, that'll fill me up for 2 or 3 lifetimes. But I remember one time I was trying to write a novel. I was in the middle of a shift, but I was on my break, and I had 15 minutes, and I had sat down, and I had this is in the mid 90s, late 90s. So I was writing not on a tablet, but like actually physically writing this thing out. And my manager, who was the owner of the restaurant at the time, she came up and she said, "Aren't you bothered by this?" And this is in the middle of one of those really bad reggae bands playing, and people are still smoking and they're drinking. And I was like, "No, I'm on my break." And I managed to just like block all that out because I had that 15 minutes to get it done. And I knew that I wasn't going to get home until 4 a.m, and I wasn't going to want to do it at 10 a.m. when I had to wake up and take care of one of my kids. And that the next point that I was going to be able to write was not until probably for that next afternoon. So I have 15 minutes. I'm getting my 30 to 100 words in right then. And that's when I'm doing it. And so it takes that type of discipline to go like, no, I don't care what's going on outside of me. I'm doing this right now.
And you touched on something that I love to, because Jag has a nice saying about it, which is people often, with creativity, it's a thing that's very hard to understand if you don't practice it very often. And so I remember I had a friend who was a bit more of a practical, black and white sort of thinking person, not really in the abstract. And he said he looked at a picture that had been drawn by, I think, Salvador Dali or something, or maybe Picasso, and he said, "I could have done that." And Jag's sort of response to that's always been, "Why didn't you?"
Yeah, people say that about Jackson Pollock too.
They're like, "Oh, I could throw colors at a board." Okay, Go
Yeah,
on.
but you didn't, did you?
And even books. People read a book and they think, that's not complicated. If I had the idea, I could write that. It's some okay. Sit down for a year. Actually, not even a year. All that time you need to build up to becoming a writer. Yeah. So, yeah, no, we very much appreciate that sort of how hard creativity can be.
It really is, and I think one of the keys to being a good human being is understanding how difficult
Yeah.
things are across the board, and to not discrediting whatever it is that other people do. And I will always be appreciative of the work it takes to create anything for the what you were just talking about. And also in terms of the stuff that I like to do, I feel like I'm always still learning, and
Right.
I'm always going to figure out something new. And with the book that you read, um, I learned that 3 act structure from my friend Chip. And prior to that, I knew what it was, and I dabbled in it and I liked it, but I didn't really try to perfect it yet. And he taught me that, and he was nailing down specific things for me in terms of what he had to think about in screenwriting, like to the page number where he had to hit these specific beats in any sort of dramatic screenplay, be it horror, thriller, or just a drama, or even a comedy. And learning from him made my writing better and made me realize some of the holes and some of the problems and the other stuff that I had written, and made me realize that, like, oh, I definitely don't know as much as I should know in terms of what I want to do with writing. And that to me is thrilling, because then I get to learn something else, and then I get to perfect something else. And I love that. I love that aspect of it. You can continually practice it, get better at it, fail at it, recover from it, and then learn something else new about whatever it is that you're creating.
And so, also, just wanted to ask you because I know your main character's female in Mungwort. So, something that I think a lot of us, especially Star Wars fans, have become aware of is the term Mary Sue.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know. I don't know your opinion on the sequels. We won't get into that because we've done that plenty of times. But when you were writing a female character, were you conscious of that Mary Sue sort of stereotype? That sort of, and it's not just women. Let's face that. It's actually just a boring character, a character who
Yeah.
seems to be able to solve everything. It shouldn't even be called a Mary Sue. It's just a boring character.
Or the
Yes.
self-insert.
Or a self-insert. Yeah, exactly. It's not actually got anything to do with women. It's got to do with characters not having any challenge in their life. So when you were writing that, what were you conscious of that? Were you, because you give Sissy
Cece, yeah.
Cece, you give her quite an interesting start. I mean, I got to the I, before I realized there's no way I'm going to be able to read all of this because the interview is on Saturday, and so so I got to the part where the bar, the start where the bar is like, and this isn't a spoiler because it's the first few pages,
That is very near the start, yeah.
and the where she's getting confronted by this guy who we're not entirely sure his intentions. I'd say,
Scarface.
yeah, I'd say they're more sexual, but but there could be other parts to it. But
He's a creep.
he's a
He's
he's
a
a
creep.
he's a creep, yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if you're a woman, you know that.
Yeah.
And so I'm just wondering, how did you find it writing a character, a female character? That I suppose is the short way of saying that.
Well, so Cece came out of my desire to be fair, and to also present a challenge to myself. I have 3 daughters. A lot of my main characters in some of my older fiction are males. And it was interesting to present a challenge to create a hero, because she is a hero in the book. She does all of the right things, but also have the particular challenges that women have to face. And one of them is what you brought up. This is a single female. She's in her mid-20s, who shows up at a diner in the middle of the night and has to confront the challenges that a lot of women have to put up with. And so the interesting aspect of writing her character was to make it believable, and to make the fact that she can overcome some of these challenges believable as well, but also allow her to succumb to some of those fears that a lot of women have to face in those particular situations. At the same time, she is a hero. I wanted to make her a badass. She's going to be able to have some strengths that people don't apply to women in those particular situations, which is why she's able to get out of the opening sequence. Although I don't want to give any spoilers, but there's a reason that she also gets out of that situation in that particular or for a particular reason. And it also made it more interesting to put a woman in the situation when she later on she gets onto this farm, and to present her with the challenges that she has to face on the farm and the farm work that she has to do. She is a capable young lady. I also wanted to show that like there are plenty of young women out there who are just as capable of physical labor as, because the farm she ends up on is demands this type of physical labor as some of the men, but she has those specific fears and challenges that women have to face all the time, which is dealing with the sometimes misogynistic men that surround them, who don't believe in them, who are going to put them down just for being women. And I didn't necessarily think of my daughters in this situation, and the challenges and the fears that they have to face. And I wasn't writing it for them, but I definitely thought like, a lot of what women have to deal with is bullshit. And I wanted to show the bullshit that they had to put up with. I also wanted to give her an ally, and that ally shows up in the character of Ben, who is basically her sidekick, and he believes in her, and he completely supports her. To also show that there also are good guys out there. I wanted to put there are 3 evil females in there, who 2 of whom have conversations. 3 of them actually have conversations with each other. So it passes I think it's called the Bledsoe test.
No, the Bledsoe
test. Yes. Isn't that what that's called? Where you have
2 female characters talk to each other
more about men. Yeah.
You've already beaten most Hollywood films. Well done.
But it was just interesting, and I like Cece. I think she's great. But in terms of the Mary Sue-ness, when Chip and I, my writing partner for the script, we're talking about, there was a specific scene where they have to go out and fight a forest fire, and because of her background, she actually has a variety of experiences with farm work, and she was in California and Colorado for a certain amount of time. She's described as a road dog, and so meaning that she's worked and traveled a lot of different places because she's tried to escape this horrific background that she's getting away from in Virginia. But she knows how to do this farm work, and she's also had some experience fighting wildfires. And it comes up in the conversation with one of the really awful, I guess, bosses of the ranch that she's working at. And he asks the group, does anybody have any wildfire experience? And she reluctantly raises her hand, and he calls her Mary Sue, for the reason that you're talking about. He's like, don't tell me that you know how to do this, Mary Sue. She's like, actually, no, I've had a little experience fighting wildfires. And that
You're
I
not
insist
a jumper.
on that.
No, I wasn't a jumper.
Yeah, exactly.
You're not a jumper. Yeah. I wasn't a jumper. I've just fought fires.
Yeah, exactly. I've done this before. And so
a bit more realistic,
I tried to. I was always worried that wasn't going to work. But my main concern when Chip brought up the fact that they were going to do this was like, so she can do everything? Like, that's not realistic. Like, you have to throw some bone to people who are going.
There has to be some challenge for her to not be able to accomplish.
Or if she is
exactly,
early 20s, mid 20s, she's not a paratrooper, and
yeah.
Yeah.
And so she's had some of that experience, and they make fun of her for it. She's like, fine, whatever, don't put me out there. I've done it. I don't care. It's not, I bypassed the compressor, moment from Star Wars that just came out of nowhere. It's just like, no, I kind of know how to do this. If you want me to do it, fine. If not, I don't care. Whatever it is you want to do.
Or being able to use force lightning for no apparent reason. Yeah. Carry on.
Yeah. Exactly.
I was thinking Independence Day. I can hack a spaceship. It's alien. Doesn't matter. Probably still uses
I've got a
C#.
Windows 97.
I have a GUI already for it.
So in that one way, I was very well aware of the fact that, like, she's going to be solving problems, but I wanted to fail her, and she fails multiple times in the novel. She screws up constantly, and people call her on it, and that was also fun. But like you said, I needed to be aware of the Mary Sue-ness, and at least have somebody call her out on it, and like you also said, like, have it be realistic. It can't just be, I can do this. No, you can't. You have no idea what you're talking
or
about.
at least when she solves the challenge, it's done through a skill she already has.
That's believable. Yeah.
So, like, if it's like, I need to carry these boxes up the stairs, but she's not strong enough, but she has an engineering background, so she knows how to get like some sort of pulley system up. And that's more believable, and that also demonstrates character development. So I agree with you completely. And I mean, I wasn't saying no. I was just sort of, this is more of an angle for how do you write a believable heroine and hero? I suppose is that sort of thing, is giving them challenges, right? Yeah.
You make it difficult for them. One of the things I think I was guilty of in the past was, well, I actually saw this in the Batman, the new movie that just came out, where he was constantly responding to challenges and things were always happening to him, but he was never actually actively participating in his own story. And I know that some of my old characters were doing that. Like, things happened and they responded. Things happened and they responded. And I didn't want that to happen to Cece. I wanted her to be active in her own story. And sure, things are going to happen and she responds, but I also wanted her to be responsible for her narrative and propelling those things forward. And then in terms of allowing her to fail, bad things are going to happen to your characters, whether it's drama, thrillers, science fiction, or horror. And they are going to have to respond. But the trick in terms of character development is making your reader worry about their safety and want them to get through that particular moment. And so you have to make them likable enough. And one of the ways that you make them likable enough is through humor. That's why Ben in the story, I think, is enjoyable. He has a good sense of humor. And Cece shares it a little bit. But the other way that you make her likable is that she stands up to bullies and that she's an active participant. And those are the two qualities that you want to see in a hero or a heroine. So that when the bad things happen and they fail, you're worried about them.
Yeah, you do need to be invested in them. And it is, that consistency of character and abilities and all that, which really helps that believability. Yeah. And nothing just coming out of nowhere, which is good to see not really happening.
And now,
in terms of the person.
And now we're entering the spoiler phase. So if you have not read it, pause it.
And it's fairly new, so
buy it, wait for the delivery, get it out, read it, and then come back to this. That's a good way to get listeners. and if you are leaving us here so you can enjoy the book, please follow us and come back here constantly, because we need your money. I mean, your views. When
it comes to spoilers, we'll try to be a little abstract.
Yeah, okay. So we'll try to confuse you. Also, we'll throw some red herrings in there. So in the book,
everyone dies. That was a surprise.
Yeah. You said it was the end of Macbeth that inspired you.
The woods came alive and just swallowed everything.
So, I suppose one of the biggest things for me, to go a little bit, maybe not so much criticism, because this might just be me, but stuff, things like
Please do. Please
soccer.
criticize the hell out of it.
Is it football, soccer?
Oh, didn't like the game.
I mean, I'm not really a soccer person. New Zealand is very much more rugby.
Yeah.
Ah,
But also like I feel like it was trying to express something, like perhaps how similar CC and Harlow are, but also their differences. Harlow is more willing to actually knuckle down in a fight sort of thing. But I
yeah.
definitely feel like I didn't quite get all of what was being said there.
It was the idea was to create a scene to show her aggression. You're right. To highlight how much Harlow just dislikes Cece from the get-go. And it was also, the idea behind that was also to, well, I mean, not to steal from Harry Potter, but like, it was always fun to watch them play those games, the Quidditch games. And there needed to be a break in all of like the crazy action. There needed to be something to ground all of the characters and set the sides so that you know who was for who and who was against who. And then the other thing is just selfish. I started playing rec league soccer about 7 years ago, and I kind of started understanding the game. Well, football, sorry, a couple of years ago. I started understanding the game a little bit, and I just thought that would be a fun aspect of their world to put in there. They were, up until that point, just so brutalized by everything that was going on, and the leaders, the evil leaders, start to understand that they need a little bit of a break, and so that was also an aspect of it. And so I wanted to allow them to have some fun that way. I guess it's similar to that Shakespearean comedic break. I mean, if we're talking about Macbeth, it's Doorman talking about how alcohol makes men impotent or impotent. And so there was just like a nice little break, but then also serve that little purpose, be like, yeah, Harlow's an asshole, and you're not supposed to like her at all. She just doesn't like Cece, and sometimes that happens, and in life sometimes that happens. In fiction, there needs to be a reason for it. And I think the two butt heads because they see so much of each other in each other. Cece's a little bit more willing to let things go. Harlow does not like the fact that Cece is the person that Harlow could have been. And she sees that, and they're just going to butt heads constantly. And in terms of criticism, that, any of the technical terms that I screwed up because of my lack of experience, because my football experience has to do with rec league soccer as a 43 to 50-year-old. That's totally on me.
All good. Yeah. I found my notes here because there's like live notes while I was reading it, and I think I put it as the sports intermission segment. So yeah, I kind of picked up on it being a intermission. There's similar interpersonal tensions, and a little
I like
side
that. I never
mention
thought of it that way. Yeah, it is intermission. It was, wasn't it? It was
Yeah.
right in the middle there.
And there is a little mention of what the employers are doing to help keep people calm. There's a little bit of world building there. I was mainly just wondering, like, did I miss anything there? But that seems about right then. What else have I got here? I've got the big question. So me and Tremaine have both been prescribed and administered a variety of medicines and the like. When it comes to the effects of certain medications or supplements in the story, was there any particular like chemicals you were drawing from for that? Because I see some similarities in some situations I've had.
Yeah, okay, so that's where the science fiction comes in. And a little bit of cultural and current commentary. one of the things that we wanted to get across is that the chemicals that you're talking about are being used for nefarious purposes, and that they're being pushed out into the wider world to create that sense of, it's almost like Soma from Brave New World, just
yes, brilliant.
relaxing and ignoring all the reality that's going on around you, so that the people who are delivering that medicine can do whatever the hell they want.
Yeah.
And it's originating on Lilith's farm. And that's where all the experimentation comes in. It's affecting the vegetation outside of the farm. And that's why the farm and all the vegetation is doing what it's doing. Also the science fiction thing. I bring up Chip again because this was partially his two ideas were talking about the effects of that, the psychotropic effects sometimes of specific natural elements that they can have on people, in terms of, almost like microdosing, just kind of like bringing down the worry and elevating the happiness and doing whatever the hell that people want you to do, as well as those particular side effects. And then the mention in the story about, there's a Russian address and it's being picked up on the peninsula in Mexico, is the idea. It's trying to at least link it to Russian trolls, misinformation, and using social media to kind of blind people to what's really going on, and allowing people in power to do what they want to do. But it's very, very subtle, and it's something that you would have to, I think, you would have to really drive and delve deep into the story if you were that interested in it to catch that. You know what I mean?
So, because for me, I have bipolar-like symptoms, and so when Jag was describing the ending, it was very much like a coming off of a mania. So that sort of, a mania, for those who don't know, is just an elevated state, but you feel invincible, you feel out of this world, powerful, you feel confident, everything is just feels like glee. And the best part of it, you don't have to take a drug for it. The downside, the depression afterwards.
The crash.
So when it was being described, I thought, is this, and obviously being a teacher, we don't want to ask you the question that I think we're all thinking, but we'll ask you afterwards.
Sure, you can ask me, I'm fine.
Well, we don't want to get you fired or anything.
Nothing's going to get me fired. I'm invincible.
Okay. Oh,
just
okay.
Kidding. No, ask me. Yeah, I'm totally open to it.
So well, that is the question: is, do you have mental health issues, or were there substances that you took maybe as a younger person that helped you get some of this perspective?
Well, yeah, definitely. I was in college. I was a musician. I was a punk rock drummer.
Oh, okay, yes.
About,
that's all you need to say.
Yeah, there we go. End of interview. No, yeah, I mean, we toured up and down the East Coast, playing in small clubs and bars and recording. So yeah, there were plenty. I mean, we drank plenty of beer and plenty of alcohol, and did plenty of partying. And if you're talking about some of the psychotropic stuff, sure, I've taken mushrooms, smoking plenty of weed, done plenty of acid. The come down was never what you were talking about. Usually it was just exhaustion after that. And in terms of mental health issues, yeah, I definitely suffer from anxiety and depression. I've gone to therapy for that. I've learned how to handle it. It's in the family. There were certain things. There was a come down about 5 to 6 years ago. I hit a bottom point. And that was my first experience in going into therapy. And I broke the news to my parents. I was just like, I'm going through this, and I'm 45 years old at that point. I don't know where this is coming from. And at that point, my dad goes, "Oh, well, that runs in the family." I went, "What?" And nobody had told me this beforehand. He's like, "Yeah." And then he proceeds to tell me about, my mother's side of the family, where one of her great uncles my mother's side of the family is Jewish, and so they grew up in New York, and he would start these businesses and build these amazing businesses up in his manic phases, and then go into his room and not come out for 3 months. The business would fail. He would basically go into a depressive episode for 3 months and then come out and go, okay, and start all over again. And this is in the 20s and early 20th century. And so there was no real treatment for it or word for it.
There was a treatment for it.
Oh, sure.
It's not a very good treatment.
Yes. Removing parts of the brain doesn't help, or the electroshock.
Not at that
They've
time.
moved on from the ice pick, yeah.
No, it wouldn't have been at that time. At that time, he would have just literally been locked in a cell and left there. That's
not helpful for people.
That's not a treatment.
Until we get to the 50s, and that's when we started to get drugs that were able to essentially give chemical straitjackets, and then the lobotomies and things like that. Just going off topic, but who cares?
You're right, and so I knew what depression was, I knew what anxiety was, but like once I started going to therapy and started getting on the sertraline, and then I started looking back at my life.
Well.
Oh yeah, and look, it gives you that floor, and then you do the cognitive behavioral therapy, and it changes everything. It allows you to reframe stuff. There's times where I don't necessarily have to take it every day now, but there are some times where I know something difficult's coming up, or I'm just feeling low, and you just get that lift.
Yeah.
And if the intrusive thoughts come in, I can combat them. I know the strategies now to do that. If I had been told this in my teens up until my mid 40s, I would have been able to combat that earlier. And so knowing it was amazing hearing my dad explain, like, oh, well, this is what your mother went through. This is what her relatives went through. This is what my uncle went through. These are all these things. Like, God damn it, why didn't you fucking tell me? Oh, it's because they were from that generation that sublimates all of that particular mental health issues. My generation X, is like, can you please tell us so we don't have to go through this anymore? And then my daughter's generation is like, who cares? Like, I got friends that are on massive amounts of sertraline. Who gives a crap? And so what you're talking about, I didn't even think of it that way. You're talking about Cece at the end, that feeling that she can do anything that she wants to do. And for me, I'm not sure if it was necessarily born out of what you're talking about, because I haven't had that specific experience with mental health. Mine was just like extreme low periods, and then normal periods, and then extreme low periods and normal periods.
Oh, that's a bad version.
Yeah,
you didn't even get the fun of spending all your money.
No, the highs came from alcohol. But she survives this horrible experience, and she wants to give the person responsible for it comeuppance. And the idea that you just put in there makes a whole lot of sense given what substances they were giving her as well. And I love that that's in there without me even knowing it. I think this also just goes back to, well, there's an element of, Jack Reacher and Cece. She is also the stereotypical superhero or larger than life hero. She's going to get revenge on the people who wronged her. And when you're talking about storytelling, that has to be that kind of satisfying ending. There's that one more thing. It's like, you know what? I survived, but I'm getting that son of a bitch. And that's what she wants to do. Yeah. That also comes from my dad. My dad was a football coach, like American football coach. Yeah. And there was always the element of like, if somebody pisses you off, punch him in the face. I was like, but Dad, I don't know how to punch. Well, do whatever you can. So there's that element as well.
My dad was a rugby player, and he got quite far. So I remember the first day I came home with like a black eye and a bloodied nose. He said, "Why didn't you hit him?" And I'm like, "Because why would I hit him?" And he's like, "Because he hit you." And I'm, no, I just told the teacher.
Yeah.
That won't stop them.
That was like
the teacher. And then very much so I learned that doesn't stop them.
No. Yeah, my dad's always response was like, the only thing that stops a bully is a punch to the nose. I was like, okay, but how do you punch him in the nose? I'll figure it out yourself. It's like,
It would have been funny if your dad went, huh, let me show you.
That would be hilarious.
yes.
Shut up, Jag. We all have dark senses of humor here.
But yeah, that's where that ending that you're talking about comes from Cece, is that desire to put that person in their place, and then when she realizes she has the power to do so through Amana, she totally takes advantage of it. But I am very happy that there is that other aspect to it. I think that's awesome.
And Jag, is there anything else you want to ask?
I've got a real bad habit in these interviews of being like, is this to this? And they're like, oh, maybe.
Outrageous claims.
I mean, it's easy to see why where sort of like Amana and Diego come from and all that. But Laszlo is Argentinian. Did I get that right?
Yes.
Where did that decision come from? That character background choice as the author, like
he needed to come from a situation in which his intelligence and weirdness was not appreciated, and so he escaped whatever purges were going on in Argentina during the 70s.
Yeah.
And I also wanted him to feel somewhat strange in addition to his additional strangeness. He's just a weird dude on top of the fact that he's from Argentina and he's in the middle of Virginia, which is a semi-southern state, and so putting him in there, it felt like that would his Argentinianness would make him feel even more exotic than everything else that was going on. It was just like one more placement of weird among weirdness. And also, the weird scientist, the weird nerd scientist is always in there with these types of science fiction things. And so I wanted to give him an interesting background,
Up to Frankenstein,
yeah. He's not just some standard white dude from Minneapolis or Massachusetts. He has this other thing that's going on. And maybe some of the horror that he saw as a kid informs what he's doing now.
Yeah.
So. Made him more willing to be horrible.
Because I write as well. I'm not published or anything, but I wrote a piece that horrified my teacher. So she said,
yes, you should.
I've done that so many times in this writing course. They've had to say to me so many times, look, we really like it, but we can't possibly ask students to be able to read.
Yeah.
So
good job. You have a captive audience.
I wrote a piece about. They said turn your favorite. The first fairy tale you remember into a sort of like just make it a bit more adult. And so they said one of the suggestions was pretend that you're doing a therapy session for one of them. And that was a big mistake. So, because when I'm in therapy, it's quite dark stuff. So, I was interviewing Hansel and Gretel's father, and and I made him basically. He survived the Second World War as a child, and witnessed his mother and his brother get killed, and then all this dark stuff comes up, and he gets really emotional at the end. And the teacher read it and said, it's really good, but I don't think we can talk about sexual assault, infanticide, the Red Army,
the horrors of war.
The horrors of war. And I'm like, what? And I've had, I don't want to make this about myself, but I've had that since school. In high school, they said, make a slideshow about something that you hate. And I said, I'll do war. And they're like, oh, yeah, sure. And it turns out showing a bunch of war images to year 11s on a slide. So I had like kids who had been like obviously in bombings and things like that and all this carnage and stuff. And I was trying to demonstrate that
Right.
I was also trying to do the refugee thing because the crisis in Syria had happened. And so I was trying to
Right.
show that what these people were fleeing from is very important. The teacher didn't see it that way.
Uh,
The
more
teacher's,
disturbed by the images.
yeah, but you know, you live, you learn. You terrify people that you might have gone out with. Anyway, Jag, you've
Yeah.
got anything else, or can we?
I mean, in regards to Laszlo, like I've been reading a lot of Charles Stross's The Laundry Files, so it's nice to have a crazy scientist baddie who isn't a literal Nazi on the moon or Antarctica. So.
Oh, right. I never thought of it that. That's he was in South America. I never put it didn't occur to me to make him a Nazi.
Oh, it's kind of nice that he wasn't. Plus, I'm not sure
I
the
just wanted
ages
him to
would have
be a
worked out
weirdo.
quite right. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted him to be a weirdo who wanted to do what he considered to be cool stuff and couldn't understand
And
why
it
nobody
is.
understood it.
It would be interesting. It just has an ethical problem there.
Well, there's ethics and then there's ethics, right?
You know,
A lot of the interesting science is
a lot
ethically
of
unsound.
good science is interrupted by things like ethics and labor
Moral.
laws and morals and you know, I've Jag as an amateur scientist has many times been told by the ethics board.
Yeah. Maybe you shouldn't go in this direction.
my favorite thing was when I described Jag as a amateur surgeon.
I'm a freelance many things. Yes.
Jack of all trades.
You, Tremaine, aspiring author, me, aspiring editor.
Anyway,
But I don't think there's a whole lot more to talk about. I'm looking at what we had prepared. I've got, just a couple of things. The characters who use some of the worse slurs are very unambiguously, baddies.
Mhm.
But how mindful did you have to be of the word choices, who says them, and all that, given the current social climate?
You're talking about Warner and Mueller.
Yeah.
And the
I think Warner's the worst. He's the worst of the two. He does not split hairs when he's making fun of people.
Yeah.
He wields his vocabulary like a drill sergeant, and he's doing it to cow people. Actually, I was just talking to my wife about it because he is funny. He knows how to dig into people in a way that is both offensive and funny at the same time. I was shooting for the drill sergeant from Full Metal Jacket, the way that he just pinpoints a weakness and goes after it all the time. He specifically goes after Ben constantly and makes fun of his weight. And Ben calls him out on it, and Warner doesn't care, because Warner's job is to be that bastard. And so my wife was like, yeah, but you have to be careful. I was like, you're right. You have to walk the fine line in making sure that people understand that he's a complete...
he's irredeemable.
He's
yes.
complete. See you next Tuesday. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. That's exactly. I was going to ask you how far I can go with my words.
We're Kiwis. We're that close to Australia. It's like, and in Australia,
That word's usually not an insult.
in Australia,
can I say it?
Yeah, say it. Yeah.
Oh yeah, he's a complete cunt, and he goes after people to make sure they understand that he's in charge, and he uses his words
It's
as a
certainly
battery.
a power play. Yeah.
Oh, look.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And he sees that Ben is Cece's ally, and he understands that Cece is stronger than him, and he couples them together, and he always tries to make sure that they know through the words and the insults that he generates at them. He accuses Cece of being gay, and he makes fun of Ben for his weight. Cece may or may not be gay. It doesn't matter. The whole point is that he's making sure that they know that he's in charge, and he's always going to go after him. But you're right, there is a fine line. And so the only thing I could do to make that line is like, okay, Warner's a horrible person. He does not care about human life. He specifically doesn't care about the people that he's in charge of. They're using them for their own purpose. But he also has to make sure that they will still do the work. And so it is that drill sergeant-ish coach, American football coach attitude of, yeah, I'm doing this, but it's to motivate you. Yeah, I'm saying these particular things. Maybe I mean it, maybe I don't. Maybe it's tongue in cheek. Maybe I'm serious. Maybe it's going to make a listener or a reader snort. Maybe it's going to appall them. But that's the type of person I am, and this is the goal here.
Right.
The key, I think, is to make it so that it's not. So this doesn't. You just don't cross that line. And he walks right up to that line every single time, and maybe like puts a toe over it and then draws it back. And then sometimes he does some decent things, and so I would say it confuses the reader, but it makes.
No, it does.
Okay.
It
makes him more of an interesting character, where he's like, "Hey, we're gonna go this far, but not that far. What the hell's wrong with you? We're just trying to get something out of these people."
That sort of strange philosophy. That sort of strange. You know, when you sort of get like into war scenarios where people are like, "Oh, yeah, I assaulted that woman, but I gave her food afterwards, so it was prostitution," and it's like, what? And then
he's not a monster; he's a bad human.
Yes, to me, he's Sergeant Barnes from Platoon. Barnes is a horrible, irredeemable human being, but he also knows he needs people around him to support him and get done what he needs to get done.
Right.
And then the Elias character, there's no Elias character on this ranch. There's no Elias. Maybe Ben. But
I saw him as almost a human version of a corporation.
Yes. Yeah. He's using people for his own ends.
Humans are definitely an expendable resource.
Yep. And so the other thing is I wanted to make sure is that there was nobody that was able to escape whatever insults or personal assaults that he was levering at them. So it could be a white girl like Cece, a white boy like Ben. It could be somebody who's Hispanic like Amana and Diego. It could be his own his workmate Mueller. It didn't matter. He didn't care. The whole point is you need to do what you need to do because this is what you're here for, and I don't care about you.
Right, and basically another thing I think is maybe the context of the situation there is what you're sort of talking about, is the fact that when these words are said, they're not being said out of the blue, they're not being said as a joke, they're being said as they're a taunt. Yeah. This is a person. This is very much important to the story because the story, these people are not nice people, and they are there to do what you're saying, and that's very important to distinguish.
The character was saying those words for a purpose, and as you said, there is one particularly. I didn't pick up on a whole lot of humor, but there was one that particularly got me, which was being no fat joke. Like, there's a wildfire. We're too busy for that ham hock or whatever it was, and it's like
Ham Planet, yeah. Yeah. I actually had to look some of those up online because I could not come up with them on my own.
I'm writing a novel and I have a comedian character. And I'm like, wait a minute, what have I done?
But you're not a comedian, Tremaine.
What have I done? Now I need to write jokes.
When it comes to Warner, sometimes I think he doesn't even care or believe some of the things that he says because of what you guys were just talking about. He doesn't care that Ben's fat. He doesn't or overweight. He doesn't care that Diego is from Central America. He doesn't.
It's just something to use.
Yeah. It's like Don Rickles. Anyway, so I think we'll wrap up there because I think that joke about us never hitting an hour is finally dead. We did it!
Well, once you cut out all the stuff I said. No, this is a
sorry that I was late, by the way.
We don't cut anything.
It's not too bad. It's not even 4:00 in the afternoon here. I'm busy from I think 7, so I can handle that myself.
Yeah.
Okay. Are you guys on the 30th? You're ahead of me, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to know what happens?
Yeah. Yes, please tell me.
Okay.
What hell am I going to have to face?
I'll just wrap us up. Okay. So, thank you all for listening this far, especially if you went through the spoiler zone. Don't forget to check back at us every Tuesday at 7 a.m. NZST. So come back for that and check us out. In the description we will have the Facebook page, the Instagram page, and the Twitter page. And also James will have some information down there once he sends them to me. Alright, thank you once more for listening. This has been Jag and Tremaine and James. Thank you so much for being on with us.
Give him his quick minute to chill. No?
Oh yeah, sorry, yeah. Your quick minute to chill. Go ahead. I forgot.
You have a book.
Oh yeah. Do you have a book for sale or something?
Oh yes, that's right. Mungwort, Mungwrt. It's on Amazon. I've got an audiobook for him too. I've got all the gear. I have Pro Tools. I know nobody. Well, it's not up right now. So I do my own readings. I can mix and master the whole thing. So yeah, Mungwort is available in ebook, paperback, hardcover, and an audiobook. And the movie. I've done a short film that is the prequel to Mungwort. And the script that's been written right now, that's coming out soon. It's called Lilith. Also NPK. There's a couple of different edits going on. I'm putting it. Actually, I just got word that it was accepted to. It's a small Comic-Con up here in DC called Awesome Con, and so I got into this short film festival with that particular edit. So that's also coming out in June.
Excellent. So that's it from us. Thank you so much, James, once again for coming along. And we'll see you all next time.